Describe the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Why was this treaty so significant? What terms did Germany and Russia agree? There we go. So it's important to know about maybe why Russia left the war. What did Germany get in return? Now this is setting the stage for really the end of World War I. All right, so let's get to it here. Describe the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. Why was the treaty so significant? So what terms did Germany and Russia agree on? So what was the treaty all about? Cassidy, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, good job. Good job. So, with the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, this is really Russia leaving the war. And this was agreed upon by the Bolsheviks, led by who? Who led the Bolsheviks again? Tanner?
Lenin.
Yeah, Vladimir Lenin. Good job. And who'd they make an agreement with? Germany, right? And now Russia's leaving the conflict. So, what does this do for Germany then? Noah, go ahead.
It makes them focus their troops just against Great Britain and France.
Yeah, good job. Good job. So this is significant because now Germany no longer has to fight a two-front war. Okay, now they can just focus all their attention on the Western Front against Great Britain and France. So if you're Great Britain and France, you're not too happy about this treaty. Okay, and at the same time, with Germany, now they really don't have to, like I said, they don't have to focus on the Eastern Front no longer. And what does Germany get in return? What else? So, I mean, this is really just picking up the advantages for Germany. Eddie? Yeah, good job. So they claimed a lot of land moving eastward into Europe, okay, moving into these Baltic states. And it came to a point where they actually gained 50% of Russia's industrial society, their economy. And we know already, was Russia industrialized? Were they modernized? No, no. And already here, Germany's taking half of that. It's like, wait a minute, how can Russia even stand on its own feet right now? Well, they're going through a revolution. They're trying to rebuild. But when they're leaving a war, when they're surrendering pretty much, Germany's going to take some land. And with these Baltic states, this land in Eastern Europe, this is also taken about 30% of Russia's population. That's huge, isn't it? Yeah, that's going to really impact Russia. And at the same time, this is going to really benefit Germany to fight on the Western Front. And what year did this happen? What year did this happen? What year did Russia leave the war? Tanner?
1917.
Yeah, 1917. And this treaty was signed in 1918. But what country helped the Allied powers achieve victory then? So although Russia's leaving, it looked like Germany was going to gain the upper hand. But what country came in and helped Great Britain and France? Cassidy? The United States. Yep, good job. Good job. But this treaty is important because this is going to set the stage for World War II. All right. Russia and Germany, okay, after World War One, they're going to lose more land, right? Especially Germany. So Germany and Russia are going to try to compete. At first, they joined sides in a way to claim some of this land back in Eastern Europe. And this is obviously threatening many of these independent countries that were created after World War One. And this is really going to be the start of, let's say, Hitler's expansion and Stalin's expansion after World War One, moving up to World War Two. Okay, so again, we're going to bring this back up. All right, this is going to be information we're going to be talking about here soon with the beginning of World War Two and how these two powers are going to try to claim back these lands that they lost. All right, is there any questions on that, guys? You see how it's important? Okay, obviously stepping closer and closer to World War Two. Right, these two powers eventually are going to rise up again, and most likely they're going to be challenging each other over these lands in Eastern Europe. Okay, okay. The main thing, just note that Russia left the war with this treaty, and Russia lost huge portions of land to Germany. And they actually had to pay some sort of reparations, but we won't get into that too much. All right, so for today, I just want to talk about the end of the war in Europe. And I want to talk about the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, so as Germany, as Austria-Hungary were fighting this two-front war for 3 years, eventually, sooner or later, these soldiers are going to get sick of the fight, right? The trench warfare was just brutal. Okay, and we already talked about the lifestyle inside the trenches. It was terrible. Low food, lack of resources, out in the elements constantly. You're constantly waiting for your enemy to march over no man's land. The new introduction of these new forms of weaponry, chemical warfare, it was brutal. It was brutal. And many of these German soldiers, even with the Eastern Front being lifted. Now, as you're marching across all Central Europe to fight in the Western Front, it just seemed like this war was never ending. And we all know in 1917, the United States joins the side of the Allied powers. And this is just going to really gain momentum for the Allied powers as they're gaining the #1 industrial and agricultural society in the world in the United States. So Germany just knew that this was coming to an end, right? And no longer will their military machine just mow these powers over. It's just going to cause a bloody stalemate even more in Western Europe. They tried to break the lines, but it didn't work out as the United States was entering the war. So on November 11th, 1918, Germany surrendered. Germany surrendered. So again, what is November 11th? What is November 11th? We had a presentation in the auditorium for this. What was it, Cassidy? Veterans Day. Yeah, good job. Good job. So the end of World War One. At first, Armistice Day. We talked about this on this day. And obviously, they changed this then to Veterans Day. That joke Miss O'Neill likes to say, right? I won't say it as we're recording, maybe later. All right, so on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, the war finally ended. Okay, and this is symbolizing, again, this armistice. Finally, this is going to cease the fighting on the Western Front. And again, this was the biggest conflict up to date. Yeah, World War II will be a little bit bigger. But at this moment, at this time, the world's never seen a war, a conflict just like this. So it's important to recognize, obviously, what just went down. But after this war, to make sure that maybe there wouldn't be a war ever again like this, a conflict like this again, the leaders of these major powers had to come together. They had to come to a solution. They had to come to some sort of terms to make sure that there will be peace moving forward. And the Big Four, make sure you guys remember these men here. The Big Four, they were the four men leaders of the United States: Woodrow Wilson, Clemenceau of France, Orlando of Italy, and David Lloyd George from England. They're going to really set the stage moving up into what we know as the Roaring '20s, the Great Depression in the United States, and eventually World War II. And like I said yesterday, the Treaty of Versailles, this is an immediate cause to World War II. All right, this is going to cause a lot of hardships for Germany, which is going to create tensions even more and even a bigger rivalry with Germany and the Allied powers. It's only going to cause some issues. But real quick, with the Treaty of Versailles, all right, these four men, especially, we know of David Lloyd George, and Clemenceau, they wanted to try to punish Germany. Okay, leading up into World War I, France and Great Britain knew that Germany was becoming too strong of a power. Right? We talked how Germany and Great Britain went through a naval arms race. We talked about how Germany and France were in a war, right? The Franco-Prussian War. And Germany was just becoming too strong, right? They're becoming threatening to Great Britain and France, and actually pushed these two powers to come together, which no one expected to happen. So it was up to England and up to France really to set the stage, set the, the limitations of Germany moving forward, so that they don't become a belligerent country again. So with the Treaty of Versailles, again, this is a cause to World War II, but this was trying to create peace after World War I. This was trying to limit Germany from becoming a dominant military power. So I like you guys to write this down. It's important. You'll definitely see this on a test. So number one, who's going to get the sole blame of the war? Who do you think? If France and Great Britain are writing out this treaty, writing out the limitations for, I don't want to give it up, but who's the sole blame of the war going to be placed on? Who do you think, Gabe? Who does France and Great Britain hate the most? Germany. Yeah, good job. So the sole blame is placed on Germany. That's number one. Did Germany start the war, though? Did Germany start the war? What happened? What started this war? What started this conflict? You guys remember? Tanner?
The assassination of Franz Ferdinand.
Yeah, good job. We talked about a lot of causes with militarism, with imperialism, nationalism. Okay, we talked about the alliance system. And then finally the assassination, right? And Franz Ferdinand, he was from Austria, right? Austria-Hungary. And we know a Serbian nationalist is who assassinated him. So in all reality, Germany really didn't even start this war, but they're getting blamed for it. Why? Well, they're the biggest threat to Great Britain, the biggest threat to France. Okay. So that's why Germany is getting the sole blame. Again, they don't want to see Germany rise to power again. All right. Two, they're going to lose some lands. Okay. So they're going to lose borderlands. I'll show you a map moving up into World War II. Germany's going to be restricted. Remember that territory that they took from France at the start of the war, the Franco-Prussian War, Alsace-Lorraine? Yeah, well, that's now taken back to France. Okay, France is getting that territory back. Also, they're going to lose a lot of land along their southern border, their western border, and their northern border, really all over. Okay, and why do you think Great Britain and France wanted to try to restrict Germany's borders? What was the reason for that? Go ahead, Kale. Okay, all right, yeah. Maybe take away their industrial areas, right? Yeah, if they're taking away their industrial areas, most likely they're not going to be able to build a strong military. And if they can't have a strong economy, well, how can they rate at the world level? They can't. They can't. So France and Great Britain, they want to take away their industrial economy and their industrial areas and a lot of the resources that are used to try to fuel these finalized products that are being created. Okay, so trying to restrict and take away some of their borders. So as they're doing that, we all know that many of these lands around Germany that are being created in these independent countries, they have a similar language as German, right? Similar culture. That's why they grouped together in the first place, right? Remember how we talked about how there are all these German-speaking states and the unification of it? Yeah. Well, this is going to cause a similar issue moving up into World War II. What do you think Hitler's going to try to do? Get those lands back for Germany because they speak a similar language and culture. Again, we'll get to that when we talk about World War II. But you can already see some of the issues with this treaty already. All right. What else are they going to lose? So their borders, but what else? So remember, in the 1800s, a lot of these European countries were traveling past their own borders to claim what? Tanner?
They couldn't have an air force.
Okay, all right. So let's just start off with we'll get to the military, but let's get to territories, right? Okay, remember imperialism. Remember how we talked about imperialism, how these European countries are traveling to Africa, traveling to Asia, and claiming these territories for different materials and different resources. Well, now the Allied powers, Great Britain and France, are going to take that from them as well. So loss of territory. We know these European countries are small. Okay, the only way that they can survive is if they have these resources from their outside territories coming in, especially Great Britain, right? Great Britain knows this in and out. But if Germany doesn't have any territorial possessions, well, how can they, again, build an economy? How can they try to pay back? Again, we'll talk about these reparations. How can they try to pay back the Allied powers from the war debts? They can't, right? There's no way that they can form an industrial society if they're losing their industries, if they're losing the lands that are helping them really boost their economy. They can't. All right, Tanner, what did you say?
They couldn't have an air force.
Okay, all right, so we'll say restricting the military. So restrict military. So what I mean by that is that they're only allowed to have a standing army of 100,000 troops. That's it. That's it. And that was only for defensive purposes. So if, again, if there's in a country trying to invade Germany, then they could somewhat raise an army. But for the most part, they're only restricted to 100,000 men. We all know with Germany, what did they have a lot of national pride in? Their military, right? Their advancements with their military. And now here, Great Britain and France are taking their national pride away from them. They're stripping it from them. And they're limiting their military to 100,000 troops. So if you guys want to write that in parentheses, that's great too. So limiting it to 100,000 troops, that's it. And again, that's kind of taking away their national pride. As they're taking away their land, the sole blame's placed on Germany. They're restricting their military. And at the same time, I'm going to add this on here. They weren't allowed to have a navy. So who do you think threw that wrinkle in? What country do you think said, "Ah, we don't want Germany to have their navy"? Kale? Yeah, why? Yeah, yeah, good job. Good job. So building up to World War One, we talked about that naval arms race, okay, and how that was crucial, really building up into World War One, and how Germany was trying to challenge the number one naval power in the world, Great Britain. So Great Britain wanted to make sure that they could control the seas and that no one opposed them. And Germany was that next in line. So why not throw that in the Treaty of Versailles as well? Take away their navy. Unbelievable. Finally, the last straw here. What do you think Germany had to do to the Allied powers? What do you think they had to do for France and Great Britain? This is your last vocab term yesterday. What did they have to do? What did they have to pay back? Go ahead. Yeah, reparations. Good job. Reparations. So they had to pay the Allied powers, France and Great Britain, and really the rest of Europe to rebuild. All right. They had to fund really the rebuilding process of Europe after World War One. All right. So the only way Europe is going to benefit, or the only way they're going to try to become a more modern society and rebuild is off of Germany's dime. But think about it. Can Germany even assemble an industrial economy again after France and Great Britain took away their borderlands, their territories, their military? No, no. So you see how the Treaty of Versailles was really setting Germany up for failure. There was no way that they could support and really pay back Great Britain and France and the rest of Europe to rebuild after World War One. They lost all their territory. They lost really big chunks of their land that were industrial areas. So again, it's going to be impossible for them to have a stable economy. In many cases, it's going to lead Germany into a very, very terrible depression. Okay, to a point where they're not going to get out of this depression until a dictator comes in charge. And we already kind of talked about who that is, Adolf Hitler. But there's going to be a lot of issues in Germany. There's going to be a lot of riots, rebellions, which we'll talk more about maybe next week. Okay. And this is going to cause an anarchy, cause chaos, really, throughout Germany, just because of this treaty. This was supposed to solve peace. In many cases, this Treaty of Versailles, again, was leading more towards another war, another conflict. So does that make sense, guys? How the treaty is kind of leading up to World War II. You can see how Germany is really being punished for the war and how the sole blame is being placed on them, and how really Great Britain and France are trying to tie them up, how they're trying to handcuff them literally to becoming another world power ever again. They want to prevent Germany from becoming a strong military threat. All right. Is there any questions on the Treaty of Versailles? What's up, Cassidy?
So obviously the Great Britain didn't want to have a war, but because the US was involved, that it gave
So the United States? We'll talk about this next week. The United States is actually going to try to support Germany in paying back these war debts. So the only way that Germany is going to pay back these debts is off of the United States dollar, right? So the United States is actually kind of in charge of rebuilding Europe in a way, right? So we'll talk about this because really Germany has no way of rebuilding itself. They lost so much land, they lost their industries, they lost their materials coming in. They needed the United States to really help them try to pay back these war reparations. It's good. It's called the Dawes Plan. We'll mention that more next week. All right. Good question, though. That was good. So again, these reparations, billions and billions of dollars. Like I said yesterday, when did they finally pay this off? Gabe? Yeah, 2010. Good job. So again, almost 100 years. How crazy is that? How crazy is that? So it just goes to show the amplitude of the Treaty of Versailles and how Germany was punished for the war, when in all reality, they weren't the ones who started it. All right, here's just a newspaper article of the war. Finally, the Western Front, the war finally ended. And then here are some of the results of the war. 5 million Allied fighters and 8 million Central Power soldiers were killed. 6.5 million innocent civilians were killed. And it just goes to show that this war has never been seen before. A conflict like this has never been seen in the world stage, where a lot of these countries, they're imperialistic possessions. let's say in Africa, let's say in Asia, down to Australia, even Canada, right? Getting involved in this conflict. We all know the United States then joins the war as well. So making it the first world war. At this point, they didn't think the Second World War would happen, so they just call it the Great War or the war to end all wars. And that wasn't the case at all, right? 50,000 Americans were killed and 230,000 wounded in World War I. And we'll talk next week some of the effects coming back to the United States. We know that many United States soldiers weren't prepared for this war whatsoever. And they had no clue the new forms of weaponry, technology that these European countries had and what they were creating. So this is going to be a shock to the United States. And after this, we'll mention that the US stays isolated. They go back to isolation. They don't get involved anymore at the world level, at the world stage. And the reason for it is because, well, we're going to try to help rebuild economically. We're not going to really try to push a lot of investment, a lot of funding into our military because, well, we're across the Atlantic Ocean. We're so far away from these issues. And we have the Pacific Ocean separating us from Asia. Okay. Is there any questions, guys? We'll talk about the League of Nations more. We'll talk about that more on more next week as well, and how this is going to cause an enemy with Japan. Okay, Japan wasn't really equally set on the same stage as the Allied powers, which causes them to act out. All right, that's all I have for today.